Coming up, another week and another opportunity to look at the QBs that could have been from Thursday night and Bo Nix to this weekend's matchup with the Atlanta Falcons. Michael Penix Jr. could let the fan base know he was the man that should have been in Big Blue. We dive into all the different angles coming up next. Yes, my friends, it is OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where you know that we are your host. Over here, Adam Armbrecht, over there, Andrew Mackwitz. We're healthy, we're wealthy, we're wise, and of course, talking about loosely the matchup this weekend with the Atlanta Falcons. But an overarching theme that has been coming to light in recent weeks is QBs that could have been and connections to potential head coaching hires. Andy, how are we, sir, on a Friday, effectively closing out the week before the holidays kick off?
Yeah, just wishing everyone a happy holidays.
Ooh.
Just got back from my son's Christmas recital, and let me tell you, it was electric, Adam. So I'm feeling the energy right now. The kids were fired up. There was a lot of nice hot apple cider. I'm in a great mood on a Friday. How are you doing, Adam?
I'm doing great, and I don't know if spiking that apple cider was the right choice to make, not because adults don't deserve to have a good time, but, you know, the kids, they love beverages, but that's the way Andy likes to roll. Hopefully everyone is happy and healthy going into the holidays. Andy does a better job of saying those things, and then it reminds me to kind of get jovial and send out the messages as well. I'm doing great, and I'm excited about this weekend because so much of all the conversations that we've had all season long continue to come to a head as we get down the stretch of this season. Before we talk about Atlanta, and there was something that really came to mind here with the way that Michael Penix Jr. talked about Kirk Cousins, who he is now replacing as the starter. A little reflection back on Thursday Night Football, which did end in ultimately the Chargers making one heck of a comeback. You got the fair catch and the wild field goal kick at the end of the first half. Wacky game. But you also got Bo Nix. And when we talk about the past draft, the 6th overall, the Giants couldn't trade down, but they could have just drafted a quarterback. Where do you stand on Bo Nix coming as this season winds down, and whether or not it feels like, boy, that's a missed opportunity for franchise quarterback? Or would we be thinking about a few years from now, that was nice, but where are we going next?
Well, it's very difficult. Obviously, you heard a lot of chatter throughout the draft process that Sean Payton loved Bo Nix and he was his pick. Now, that's easy to say when there's 4 or 5 other quarterbacks that go off the board before Bo Nix and you're picking and you're like, he was always our guy. We definitely didn't want Jaden Daniels or Caleb Williams, right? But to that point, Adam, it is fascinating to think, you know, he was older. He was the most mature. Everyone said that he probably had the best floor, but his ceiling is kind of what we're seeing. But guess what, Adam? That leads your team to 9-6 and a potential playoff berth. And watching Bo Nix operate, completing 72% of his passes, throwing for 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, 265 passing yards, a 63 QBR rating is fairly good. And you see just how quickly, even with an $80 million Russell Wilson cap hit, that if you get the quarterback situation right, you set yourself up for sustained success. And that's ultimately what I think about with Bo Nix. I don't think he's going to win an MVP award at any point, but you can tell the difference in this team from last year to this year is him operating the system. And when Russell Wilson's cap hit comes off the books, think about how much more money they're going to have next year to be able to really double down on whatever roster they have going right now.
And that's the part of it for me from a Giants perspective, right? So we could sit here and say whether or not would you want Bo Nix long term? What would you have felt in the moment? We might have had similar vibes to drafting Daniel Jones years ago, 6th overall, and saying, was that really worth that? Boy, consensus says probably not. I think the same narratives would have bubbled up if the Giants had made that choice. But remember what the perspective was on the Denver Broncos ahead of this season. It was they're a mess because of the money and Russell Wilson. This is going to be a reset year. Strip it down. They'll build it back up. Maybe they will find their franchise guy. He'll get a year under his belt. I don't know. I can't sit here and say that if the Giants had drafted Bo Nix, we'd be talking about them being 9-7 and being in a position to make the playoffs this year. But that's not about Bo Nix. That's about the organization. It's about the coaching. It's about the GM. So to me, Thursday night and the season overall for the Broncos and Bo Nix, where he's had his ups and downs, obviously, has been more about that. It's that if you had drafted Bo Nix, we'd probably say this is why you don't draft old quarterbacks. It's not going to work out. He's going to be older than Daniel Jones practically. And it would have created that further narrative of ineptitude. Whereas the Denver Broncos, again, like we talked about with Tampa Bay on Wednesday and some of the GM opportunities, what did they do? Denver Broncos, competitive. Then they get a chance to get Peyton Manning. They bring him in, go win a championship. And when it comes to resetting and recycling, it didn't take nearly as long for them to get back on track. And we could even argue the case that Sean Payton could have been on the radar for the Giants to come in when they were making all of their head coaching choices as well.
Yeah, Adam, and when you think about this quarterback class, you look at it, there's kind of different progressions that everyone's gone through. Caleb Williams, we mentioned it on one of the last episodes, like what a mess it has been having a lame duck head coach and an offensive coordinator that nobody believed in. They need to do a full reset for him. We knew that Drake May needed a little bit more seasoning and that it was going to maybe a couple years for him to flash, but his traits were great. Everyone thought that Jaden Daniels was pro ready. Everyone said you're going to get a Bo Nix who's a veteran at this level of play. And so there are rookie quarterbacks that are making instant impacts, Adam. Remember, the Commanders were drafting second overall in this draft. Goes to show how terrible they were last season. A changing head coach, a changing quarterback on a rookie deal, and all of a sudden they're basically almost guaranteed a playoff spot at this point. I think I don't want to go over my skis in terms of how important it is on these quarterbacks, but you can see there's basically a 50% hit rate so far on drafting a rookie quarterback and being able to have make an instant impact for you. It only makes me think about if the Giants are in this situation next year and they go get their rookie quarterback, that it shows you not only promise for the future, but maybe that the team can be much, much more competitive instantly.
Yeah, and a footnote about that too, especially when we think about Bo Nix, it's like, again, do I think that Bo Nix, relative to say Jaden Daniels, right? Is Bo Nix going to go on to be an all-pro Hall of Fame quarterback? I don't know. I'd say probably not if I'm calling it today on, December 20th, 2024. But the organizational stability, like this is that idea of it's like what Daniel Jones, maybe I thought maybe Daniel Jones should have been or could have been for the Giants. Hey, he'll be the starter for 5-6 years. We're not going to think about him like a Hall of Famer, but he'll get the job done. We'll stay competitive and we'll worry about that next phase when that needs to happen. And that's what it feels like at a minimum the Denver Broncos have accomplished. We'll see what they do with all that cap room that they get. So to your point, man, we say this every single year. It doesn't matter what it looks like on paper coming in. Some guys look better, some guys look worse, some guys hit, some guys miss in terms of pedigree and expectation. But 50-50. When you draft a quarterback at the top of the draft, it's almost always 50-50, hit or miss. And sometimes, like with Jaden Daniels, there seems to be, hey, we know this is going to be the guy. But everything after that does become more of a buffet style. You take a couple scoops, you taste it, and you don't know until you're sitting at the table whether or not it was the right meal to purchase.
Adam, the last thing I want to say about Bo Nix, just because it's relevant as we go through some of the different quarterbacks and what could have been for the Giants. I look at Bo Nix, like maybe his upside is Ryan Tannehill. And like Ryan Tannehill won division titles, got the number 1 seed in the AFC. He may not have the upside of a Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes, but they made playoffs runs. They won playoff games. And oh, by the way, Ryan Tannehill had a 64% career completion percentage. Bo Nix is at 64.3. They both roughly have a 2-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio. And Ryan Tannehill won more games than he lost. You put that all together, you're like, that's a top half quarterback in the league. You can win with that. You cannot win with the dysfunction that the Giants have had over the last 2 seasons with Daniel Jones being injured and just the overall poor performance from the quarterback room.
Let's go ahead and turn our attention to this weekend and to another QB who's going to make his starting debut in Michael Penix Jr. Some additional stats here that should bring up some alarms as far as good decision, bad decision to draft or not draft a quarterback this last year as we move forward for Big Blue. We'll do that here in just one moment. All right, Andy. So as we talk about coming this weekend and playing the Atlanta Falcons, one thing that I'll just round out here, because we're talking about Bo Nix and, what is he going to be or not be? Funnily enough, though, so right now you have a pretty good sample size on Caleb Williams, on Jaden Daniels, on Drake May, and also on Bo Nix, right? Bo Nix has the most passing touchdowns out of the rookie class right now. He is 22 up, 11 down. Jaden Daniels, 17. Caleb Williams, also 17. And oh, by the way, like every one of these guys, now Drake May has thrown a few more picks. You would probably look through all these teams and say the New England Patriots are obviously like the worst team overall around their quarterback right now. But 17-5 for Caleb Williams, 17-6 for Jaden Daniels, say nothing of the running ability of those quarterbacks, 22-11 for Bo Nix. And when you go to the NFL overall right now, Bo Nix is sitting there as a top 10. He is 9th overall in passing touchdowns this season. Like, so just as a footnote, and also about this rookie class collectively, we're getting a lot of sample sizes on them. And whether or not he is a Hall of Famer, he's a top 10. He's in the conversation of being a top 10 quarterback this year. That is, I think, shocking relative to the way that he was maybe discussed, and the idea that Denver just kind of, hey, sit back and we like him, we'll go ahead and take him. Like you say, convince everybody else that we really wanted Bo Nix. Maybe they did just really want Bo Nix, and that goes back to talent evaluation and knowing what you can do with a player.
You know what? I just keep coming back to, it feels like you should take as many lotto tickets as you possibly can at the quarterback position. Like, you should just keep drafting. If a guy doesn't work, you got to find the next guy that can make it work. Look no further than the Atlanta Falcons that were like, we have plan A, plan B. We'll think about plan C at some point. But Bo Nix clearly has shown that he might win Offensive Rookie of the Year. He might find a way to take that away from someone like Jaden Daniels with the way that he's playing. So, look, the Giants are presumably going to have a top 3 or 4 pick in the draft, as long as they don't do something silly like mess around and ultimately beat a team like the Atlanta Falcons coming up this weekend.
And so we will get into the Michael Penix Jr. of it, another player that the Giants could have drafted potentially at the QB position. And this one is a little bit different for me even than the conversation about Bo Nix. But first, Kirk Cousins. Here's the other guy. So on Wednesday, we were talking about our next head coach and potential GM tandem. I brought up Mike LaFleur, obviously with ties to his brother in Green Bay and some pedigree there. And I said, oh, well, what if you brought veteran Matthew Stafford with him? Well, we failed to discuss that day, specifically because we knew we were going to come up on Friday, was that Kirk Cousins is, by the 49ers system, regarded as the perfect QB. This is the guy that does everything right that you want in that system. Should we, one, have been having the discussion about maybe it's the Mike LaFleur and Kirk Cousins tandem, and where do you stand ultimately on a high level? Coming off the injury, hasn't been a great year for him, obviously. I think 18 up, 16 down. He's passing now the baton to Michael Penix Jr., which I want to discuss as well. But where do you stand on Kirk Cousins? Because I have a hard time when you go and you look at the stats. We talk about game manager. He's run out of town in Minnesota, going to get run out of town in Atlanta. But there's nothing on paper or in the locker room that says anything other than Kirk Cousins is a guy that is well-respected, well-regarded, and certainly has been productive to a pretty high level at the NFL.
He has. Adam, I mean, put this into perspective for you.
Okay.
Kirk Cousins right now on the season has thrown for, I will tell you right now, 3,500 yards. 3,508 is the number that he's thrown for, and he's getting benched with a few games to go in the season. That is more than Daniel Jones ever had in a single season for the New York Giants. So putting that in perspective,
also 7th
is
overall in the NFL right now. Kirk Cousins, the 7th highest yardage quarterback, is being benched now because they have the rookie to go to. Please continue.
Yes, and if you look at it, Kirk Cousins did fall off a little bit this season. Adam, you have to go all the way back to 2014 to find a lower quarterback rating year for Kirk Cousins. It's been a decade since his passer rating has been this low in the 80s. 5 of the last 6 years with the Minnesota Vikings, he had over 100 basically as his quarterback rating. You can tell that his play has dipped off. But what's funny is that a team that hasn't had great quarterback play since Eli Manning, the fact that we are saying like, oh, Kirk Cousins has fallen off, his stats would still be better than anything that the Giants have basically put out there over the last 5 or 6 different seasons. But Adam, with that said, we talked about Mike LaFleur as a potential option. Kirk Cousins is potentially going to play somewhere else next season, and you will see the Atlanta Falcons hand the keys over to Michael Penix Jr. Should the Giants be interested in Kirk Cousins if he becomes available and he has interest in playing here?
Well, let me do 2 things first. Just very quickly, and you mentioned about the drop off in QBR. That makes Kirk Cousins the 23rd quarterback in the league right now based on QBR. You know who's not listed in the top 34 quarterbacks of the league? Any Giants quarterback. Anyway, just wanted to go ahead and throw a little tidbit out there for you. My better question, before we get to this offseason, because I think it's worth having, do you sit here today and think we look at Atlanta The Giants could have done the exact thing that Atlanta did. They could have gotten Kirk Cousins this past offseason. They could have drafted Michael Penix Jr. If you right now, with the projection of a possible potential, number one overall pick and everything else we're talking about, would you have signed off on this operation that Atlanta is doing a year ago for the New York Football Giants, where you are now handing off to who you think could be your franchise quarterback?
Short answer, no, because I don't necessarily see the point in signing Kirk Cousins when you already had Daniel Jones as the bridge quarterback. The second that Daniel Jones didn't play very well, if you had drafted Michael Penix, you could have just gone to Michael Penix at that point.
Well, let me tell you another story about that too, which I agree with you, by the way, because you just could have drafted Michael Penix Jr. and arguably in the Giants situation, you could have handed it off that much sooner. However, the one thing I will point out before we get into this next offseason, there's a lot of fun stuff about this one. I will say Michael Penix Jr., when he was interviewed leading up to his debut as a starting NFL quarterback, they asked him about Kirk Cousins. He could not stop himself from the praise that he gave to Kirk Cousins, how much he loves him, appreciates him, the standard he set, talking about, this is very specific to the Giants situation, a quarterback that when he's on the sidelines and watches Kirk Cousins in the huddle and sees him going to his third and fourth and hitting the fifth read on a pass play, Daniel Jones doesn't even know that there's a fifth option on a pass play. So the big difference here to me would be if you were gonna do this system, not that Kirk Cousins regardless, but the veteran QB, right? It matters to show a rookie how to go about your business. And even if Daniel Jones was a pro from the how do you talk to the media, how do you handle yourself in the locker room, in the film room, all that stuff, he has never been a whiff of the quarterback that Kirk Cousins has been. And there is value to that. So to whatever degree, whatever veteran it may have been, I think there's a big difference if the Giants had made that choice to say, who is going to be, by the way, the Kurt Warner to our Eli Manning, right? Who's going to be the guy that we bring in that has a ton of history and success at the NFL level and also knows ultimately this is not going to be my ship to run, even if there's a bit of frustration on Kirk Cousins' side, obviously.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with that. Obviously, a little thing called the contract that Joe Schoen gave Daniel Jones kind of stood in the way of maybe having a lot of those other options, right?
Maybe you didn't give yourself the opportunity to have that option because you did the other stupid thing. But we don't need come on.
Right, exactly. So the cap hit on Daniel Jones made it prohibitive for them to go get someone like a Kirk Cousins or be able to do it with some other veteran potentially. It was always going to be Daniel Jones on this roster for this season. But the Giants, instead of having their backup plan at quarterback ready to go in waiting in the wings, now have to go potentially look to next offseason to figure out what the quarterback situation is going to look like.
And so would I be interested in Kirk Cousins? I think the bigger question here would be, would Kirk Cousins be interested in the Giants? Because you're coming off of, for everything I'm talking about, the positive because he's a pro, but he didn't go into Atlanta to have them necessarily draft Michael Penix Jr. That was a shock to him on draft night, but he still handled himself the right way. I'd be hard-pressed to think that Kirk Cousins is going to say, hey, why don't you set up a trade to another team that is probably going to draft a rookie quarterback and is probably at some point this upcoming year say, okay, time to start developing the next wave, right? He's going to be looking around the league for what's my landing spot. This conversation about Brock Purdy and the 49ers and the money that he's going to want, and San Francisco being the kind of team that could say, maybe we can do it a bit cheaper, right? Save 20 million, 25 million on a contract and get in a veteran that we believe runs our system well. So would I be interested? Ultimately, I don't think so. All things considered, but you do have to account for having a veteran quarterback that helps teach a rookie. Give me the other options. There's probably better ones financially, etc. But it is going to be a factor in how the Giants approach the seasons going forward.
Yeah, Adam, I am full out on the Kirk Cousins thing for the Giants. I've mentioned it before. It's nothing against Kirk Cousins other than the fact that he's coming off this Achilles injury. He looked like a shell of himself this year. It doesn't look like he can plant his foot with confidence to be able to actually like rifle a ball with velocity in there.
But how much of that do you think is on the injury? Like when you see even old Aaron Rodgers, who like looks a little bit better now down these last few games, do you think about it as all like maybe Kurt, we won't know fully where he is at this stage of his career until he's quote unquote fully healthy? I don't want to, it's not an excuse, but just how much would you factor it in?
Well, it is a huge factor, but Adam, I kind of go back to like when you saw Aaron Rodgers throw a ball, he had zip and velocity on it. That has never been part of Kirk Cousins' game. You're not like, whoa, did you see Kirk Cousins sneakily throw that ball 80 miles an hour into that tight window. No, he's been a guy that kind of lobs the ball up. He's an accurate guy. It's just I have visions of Kirk Cousins starting for the Giants. He is completely immobile. The offensive line is not fixed. He's throwing lame ducks up in the air in MetLife Stadium with 30-mile-an-hour swirling winds, and we don't know where the ball is going to go or what team is going to catch the ball. To me, it's a recipe for disaster. You need someone that has a little bit more arm talent than I think Kirk Cousins provides. But again, if we're talking about a bridge quarterback, the financials of Kirk Cousins don't make it seem like he would be a bridge quarterback. To me, if you are going the Kirk Cousins route, you are handing him the ball and you are saying, you are our quarterback for this year unequivocally until we figure everything else out.
This would be we talked about it on Wednesday, right? Okay, LaFleur maybe brings you Stafford, and you go, well, we didn't get Stafford. We didn't get the guy who, oh God, the pedigree, and we still think he has everything left in the tank, and it'd be such a beautiful thing. Best quarterback to ever suit up for the New York Football Giants. You'd be like, well, what's plan B? I don't know, Kirk Cousins? And then you try to have that conversation, and I think that would be very different, and that would be, by the way, a very tip for what's been going on lately. That would be like, of course. You couldn't get X. You couldn't get Stafford. So you pivoted to Kirk Cousins, which ultimately is like the most deflating thing you could possibly tell your fan base.
Well, and just the financial ramifications of that decision. So I'm just going to give you just a very quick overview to make sure that people understand what it means. So Kirk Cousins signed a multi-year deal with the Atlanta Falcons, basically got 80 or 90 million guaranteed right out of the gate. It was an interesting deal. It got even more interesting when they drafted Michael Penix Jr. right after it. But the Falcons are essentially going to be paying $80 to $90 million for 1 year of Kirk Cousins' service. In the offseason, Kirk Cousins has a no-trade clause, so he can kind of dictate where he goes. He wants to make sure that he gets put in the right situation. But any team that is trading for Kirk Cousins, the cap hit is basically $27.5 million in the cap situation right there. So the Giants already have
that Atlanta will eat some of that money potentially, just to be clear.
Potentially to be able to move him along. But you already have the dead cap hit from Daniel Jones sitting on the books for the Giants, Adam. And then you're all of a sudden going to throw another 20-something million on Kirk Cousins. Basically, your quarterback room is $50 million to have Kirk Cousins coming off this Achilles injury, and you still don't have a plan for the future. So for me, I just kind of look at it. I'm like, there's got to be a cheaper alternative, a Justin Fields, a someone else that you could get for $10 million on your cap while you develop the potential quarterback of the future.
Coming up here in 1 second, we close things out looking at this matchup and the debut of Michael Penix Jr. He was the 4th quarterback taken overall in last year's draft, ahead of J.J. McCarthy, ahead of Bo Nix. Will the Giants get the first taste of failing to be the buyer and having some remorse? We do that here, to close things out in just one moment. Okay, a reminder that today's episode also is brought to you by Potential, Pietential.com. Potential is a free online service for individual users, sets the baseline for your well-being, gives you tools to improve, and also helps track your progress over time. Something we've been doing with the New York Football Giants, and I don't think the progress is going well. Check out Potential.com today. Now, when we talk about Michael Penix Jr., same thing. Now, he's older as well, by the way. The reason why we haven't seen him sooner is because of the injury, and that was a part of the draft stock and where he was going to be taken. He's going to be 25 years old. So he's on the older side, ton of upside in his talent. What do you think, based on the state of the Giants right now and the defense and the roster and who they're going to put on the field, are we going to come out of Sunday saying, good God, this guy just dropped 3 touchdowns, ran for 70 yards, whatever it is? Is this going to be one of those rookie debuts? You said this last against the Ravens about how bad of a loss could it be, and what would that mean? Wouldn't it just be another turd candle on the cake of this season if a rookie QB that you could have drafted and everything else comes walking on the field and just goes, hey, home debut, baby, look at me cook the Giants defense?
Adam, this is the worst case scenario for the Giants. The Giants on Sunday are in a lose-lose situation. There literally is no winning for the Giants in this. And maybe if you thread the needle of like what's possible, there's an outcome that maybe you could squint and say was good for the Giants. Outside of that, it is a full lose-lose, and I'll explain why. Okay. There's 2 things that could happen. If Michael Penix Jr. plays well and the Atlanta Falcons beat the brakes off of the New York Football Giants, you will turn around and say, The Giants had an opportunity to draft their quarterback of the future. He's got a rocket arm. It would suit perfectly with a guy like Malik Neighbors moving forward. The Giants missed the plot on not being able to get Michael Penix Jr., right? That's area number one. Number two is Michael Penix Jr. doesn't look good. He looks overwhelmed. He looks like the moment is too big for him. Things aren't working. He hasn't figured it out. And all of a sudden, the Giants mess around and they win the football game, which ultimately could move them down to as low as 8th in the NFL draft. So to me, it's like either Michael Penix Jr. carves you up and you lose, and it's what could have been with him, or he looks overwhelmed. The Giants win the game and they ultimately tank their draft stock.
Yeah, of course. And then that's where we are for the New York Football Giants, right? Should have, could have, would have drafted him, didn't. Okay. Or good thing we didn't draft him, but ultimately messed up our chances. The beauty of this is I think that like Michael Penix Jr. could play bad and the Giants can still lose this game. I mean, let's just be clear. Like they clearly are a team very capable of not succeeding. Drew Lock's going to be starting, by the way, in case anyone's wondering. That's who's under center this week for the Giants. Just they like to mix it up. Tim Boyle, Tommy DeVito, Drew Lock, all the quarterbacks you expect.
I got a question for you on that, Adam.
Sure.
Drew Lock being announced as the starter. We'll bring in a little bit more Giants-centric here as opposed to like what could have been. Do you think I think, and most Giants, people that follow the Giants very well and have watched the film have said Tim Boyle so far looked the best. We talked about it on the recap show. Like he threw with anticipation. He got Malik Neighbors involved. He looked like he ran the offense pretty well. To me, I think Tim Boyle might give you, I know it's crazy. Tim Boyle might give you a better chance to win this upcoming game than Drew Lock does. So do you think that Drew Lock is starting because he gives the Giants the best chance to win?
Well, here's how stupid this is. I think that Drew Lock is starting because the Giants, they're so dumb. Like they signed him in the offseason. We said, why are you spending the money on him? What's the value there? Then when you get rid of Daniel Jones, you go to Tommy DeVito. You're like, well, now really, what were you doing with Drew Lock? But then in some weird, twisted, warped way, they're like, well, now that he's healthy, we should start Drew Lock. Because why? We're a well-respected organization, and we respect our players. And we told, you know what I mean? Like some stupid, it isn't as smart. It's not as clever as, hey, Tim Boyle looked too good. Let's not mess around here. Let's make sure. That would be the clever thing. That would be, hey, respect this organization. But instead, I'm way closer to thinking that this organization is Woody Johnson listening to his son in Madden ratings and saying, well, you know, if you look at the quality points here, and then we'll talk about that next week. Like that's where I lean that side of things, not on the Giants organization doing things the right way, which just briefly to close things out as well, you can touch on this because we didn't get into it heavy on Wednesday. There's the because of the way the PR arm of the New York Football Giants has been acting this season and reacting to the way the team has been getting covered. I have zero confidence in what their processing is and decision-making is around this. I wouldn't be shocked if they think that Drew Lock does give them the best chance to win, even though the sample size tells you something completely different.
Yeah, that's the tough part is like, are they doing it because they're throwing bad money at bad money where it's like, well, we paid him all this money, so we should probably start him to and hopefully he flashes so that we could say, I told you so. See, Drew Lock has it in him. Like, hey, to me, I think you're in the same boat as me. I'm like, what is the thought process behind this? They're just saying like, you shouldn't lose your job to injury. Okay, I guess. I don't really understand it. We talked about it a little bit on Wednesday's show. The Giants are a mess right now. They are top to bottom. Full organization, Adam. And just hearing the reports basically online that Giants head of PR is reaching out to podcasters telling them that he's going to cut off access if they talk badly about the front office anymore. Like we're in the Gestapo or something right now. Like it is unbelievable to me how the Giants are focused on people being critical of the tire fire situation that the season has unfolded to and not focused on inward saying, you are absolutely right. This is not acceptable. We need to be better as an organization. Don't you think that people would react way better if they were like, hand up, you know what? You are absolutely right. It is fair to criticize our organization because this is not the standard that we uphold.
Even at a minimum, just don't say anything. Don't reach out to the content creators and tell them we're going to take away your access if you cover us poorly. Just say internally, hey, start to reduce their access. Say we're too filled on this particular media, whatever it is. Instead, you say the quiet part out loud and tell everybody we are literally walking around here with getting butthurt over stuff. and yelling at people that shouldn't even be on our radar. I don't mean that's not disrespectful, by the way, to who's creating content, who's covering on your radar, because you're an NFL. You are one of 32. You're a billion-dollar entity, and you're worried about what everyone, even on the lowest levels, is doing. And that's because internally this organization is all over the map. And I'll let you hop back in here, but I just want to I want to make sure we get to the games to watch this weekend that matter in terms of the tankathon odds and where the Giants stand. And just one very brief note in all these conversations, because someone pointed this out over on YouTube. They brought back up the offensive line, which, believe me, we got plenty of time to get back into that conversation. But when talking about quarterbacks and what could have been, and you said this about your man Kirk Cousins, not a lot of mobility next offseason, but with the offensive line and protection, yeah, just as a reminder, we get it. The offensive line is still going to be a topic of conversation for this franchise now, a decade and a half into the we are about to fix it 2, 3 GMs, 9 coaches later.
Yeah, the dysfunction in the front office would be totally fine if the team was winning football games, but they're not, and they're not getting better, and the performance has been lackluster from top to bottom, from the players not performing well, to the coaches not being able to get the most out of their players, to the GM who picked these people, to the PR team and the ownership that is trying to send a message of what type of organization we are. Literally from top to bottom, it has not been good enough in any area. I just like honesty, Adam. And I respect people way more if they just put their hand up and they're like, you know what? I got it wrong, or I need to be better, or I need to do certain
It's not going
things.
great. We got to figure this out.
It's everyone else's problem. It's not us. It's like, no, look inward, and people will have more respect if you are like acknowledging that you are part of the problem. Then people will respect you more. It's ridiculous. All right, Adam.
Well, by the way, they're yelling about don't cover us poorly and not acknowledging that things aren't going well. You know what I mean? Like they're not doing, it'd be one thing to say, hey, if you're going to cover us negatively like this, you're not going to get access. We know we're having a bad season. We don't need you rubbing it in our face. Instead, it's just, you can't cover us poorly. And how dare you? We're not even going to acknowledge how bad this thing is going right now.
We're just 1 month removed from when Joe Schoen said we're not that far off. Think about that for a second. We're 1 month, we're 30 something days. That was on November 12th. We're now almost at the 20th. We're just a month and change after that. And if you're telling me, if they were to come out today and say we're not that far off, wouldn't that be like one of the laughing stock comments of all time? Because you need to identify we are far off. We did miss the mark. We need to get better. Instead, it's, well, if you look at our record in 1-score games, and if you flip it and like a touchdown, like, what are you talking about? You're getting blown out by 30 points in these games. You're not competitive. Just identify it, acknowledge it. It just gets me very, very frustrated that the organization feels like they're not taking accountability for where we currently are.
At the end of the day, the Giants are 9.5-point dog, or 8.5, depending on where you're going right now in Atlanta. Line's been moving around a little bit. We'll, of course, be covering it next week, coming back in, reacting to what we see, mostly from Michael Penix Jr., I will assume. But before we close out, a reminder, there are currently, after the Giants and the Raiders at the top of the draft with 2 wins, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 teams with 3 wins, and 2 teams in the Jets and the Bears with 4 wins. Notably, though, you look at the schedule, Cleveland, a 3-win team. They're at Cincinnati, and Cincinnati is still playing for things right now, and Joe Burrow is disgusted and pissed about it. You look down that list there. The Jets want to have some good vibes, but they're playing the Rams. They also need this win. So there's a world here. Arizona and against the Carolina Panthers, all these games that are getting drawn up here. Jacksonville against the Raiders. That's the new unique one here, right? Top of the draft where we'd say, well, I wouldn't hate it. If Vegas wants to win one here, let's level the playing field a little bit. But these handful of games, again, I think we're going to come out of this weekend talking about every team that's losing. The only team that won this past week inside of that top 10 was the New York Jets. So expect more losses across the board here. The Giants cannot afford to mess around and find out what happens if you accidentally stumble into a win against the Atlanta Falcons.
Yeah, if at the end of the day, if you are a Giants fan, one, you want the team to be competitive but lose in Atlanta. I think that's the ultimate goal to make sure that we stay on track for the number 1 pick. The second thing is you should be a Jacksonville Jaguars fan, because if the Giants win, if the Giants lose out and the Raiders lose out, most people have done the calculations that strength of schedule would give the Raiders the advantage of getting the number 1 overall pick right now. Any win that the Raiders would have, if the Giants lose out, they are assured of the number 1 pick. So right now we are Jags fans for the weekend. If you are a Giants fan and you hope that they can find a way to mess around and get a win at home in a meaningless game for both of those organizations.
Don't you want the Raiders to win that game?
Yeah, you want the Raiders to win.
You were saying at the end of the day, Andy meant the Raiders, but he said Jaguars a couple of times. So just to be clear, he wants those Raiders to mess around and get a win against those Jaguars.
Correct. Yes. You want the Raiders to win,
Okay.
get an additional win so that if the Giants lose out, they are assured of the number 1 overall pick. So you are a big Raiders fan. If
I got to tell you, man,
for
getting lost in the sauce of this effing end of the season and watching every other game other than the Giants to see where everybody finishes, it is such a mess. Bottom line being, we all know
Adam, last thing I will say is it's a sad season when the only hope you have is going over to tankathon and trying to figure out what the team needs to do for you to get a higher draft pick. That's the current state of affairs for the New York Giants. We're rooting for the Raiders. We're probably rooting for the Falcons. And let's figure out a way to get this number 1 overall pick.
It's a beautiful time of year. By the way, guys, again, we'll be back in on Monday, so you'll still see us one more time before the official holiday. But again, prepare for it. Great. Stay home this weekend, cozy by the fire, some snow maybe in the forecast. So already getting to the holiday spirit. We'll be back in breaking down whatever we end up seeing on Sunday from the New York Football Giants and how it impacts their chances to be in the best position when it comes to next year's draft. Until then, though, guys, get over to YouTube. I've been wearing collared shirts this entire week. I mean, there's a real opportunity to see how I'm improving things. Oh, Andrew's wearing a little something. I think it's a 3/4 zip. It's probably fleece. It's not a big deal. It's not a competition. It's not comparing here. Bottom line is I look really good and Andy's doing his best. You get us on the podcast feed at One Giant Podcast and also on X at Adam Arbrecht at AMAC214 and at One Giant Podcast. Until the next time, until the best times, as Andrew Mackwitz would want, need, and nay, demand that people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.